All right, everybody. So we're getting closer to the main show here, but I do want, before we dive into that, to take a step back and to really level set on a lot of the core issues that bring us together here today. So if you'll sit with me for just a moment here, I'm going to pull up some slides, and I want to talk about some of the core issues that are on the table today. Just a little bit of framing before we start to dive into some more of the substance ahead. So I want to start with what we know. We're all familiar with the economic realities of this past year. Since March 2020, over 73 million Americans have lost work. That's more than a doubling in our unemployment rate. It's left almost 11% of our workforce without employment. And nearly 2 million more workers are working part-time or on reduced hours as a result of the pandemic. An additional 2.3 million have dropped out of the labor force altogether. Black, Latinx, and Native American workers are disproportionately impacted. They face unemployment rates of up to 2 times that of white workers. Their experience is compounded by the impact of systemic racism. And women are also hit very hard, accounting for 58% of workforce exits since the beginning of the pandemic and 100% of net job losses in December 2020 alone. All these facts and figures are ones that have been widely reported. The thing is, the people who are suffering most, who always suffer most, are those who can least afford it. And while this time of crises has left the whole country reeling and has been a time of pain, a time of challenge, reflection for so many, it's also true that from an economic perspective, many people are actually doing quite well. Some industries are thriving in this new context. White-collar workers can now work from home. They may be enjoying no commute, more time with their families, life without continuous business travel, and those who have investments in the stock market are seeing their value go up by 15%. Let's think about that disparity of the economic facts and figures we're talking about here. And that's what we've got, a tale of 2 communities. Now, even before the pandemic, we knew our economy was becoming more fractured. Too many people were locked out of opportunity. Income inequality was a challenging reality. But in 2020, that challenge has accelerated in ways we could not have imagined. Between March and December last year, earnings of the bottom 82% of workers declined by almost $840 billion. And at the same time, the aggregate wealth of US billionaires, all 660 of them, has increased by over 1.1 trillion. Bottom line is simple here. Lower income communities are being gutted. The middle class, squeezed. And the super wealthy are doing better than ever. And I want to let that sink in for a moment. Here we are in the crisis of a generation, if not our lifetimes, and it's just business as usual for inequality. And while a federal response can certainly help, the actions of government won't come close to being the solution we need when they're on their own. No amount of stimulus will fundamentally change who gets hired and how, who is promoted and when, and what those career pathways look like. So we know we must act, and we must act quickly before our window to drive an inclusive economic recovery closes. If we do nothing, the best we can hope for is a pretty abysmal steady state, more of the same. Now, this is a moment of uncertainty. And you may be thinking, I can barely dress myself in the mornings, let alone fix income inequality. But if we let ourselves be disoriented, if we do nothing, we are dooming generations. So where do we go from here? How do we bend our arrow upward? Right, I know, all of this sounds like a really gloomy way to start a summit, but stay with me. I am getting to the good part. If you take nothing else from this intro, remember, times like these, they give us an opportunity to change, to reorient. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about a return to normal, but 1 year later, I think we can all agree that is not ever going to happen. Instead, a new normal will emerge, one that is yet unformed, and we are the ones who can shape that. The really good news is that business leaders like you are perfectly positioned to take action that will lead to a more just and more equitable economic future. And that's because you can undertake a whole series of activities, like Jenny was describing, that directly contribute to the economic opportunity and mobility of your employees. Fortune 500 companies employ over 27 million people, more than 20% of our workforce. So who do you hire? Who gets promoted? Have you addressed or assessed and addressed talent practices for bias, for discrimination? What benefits do you provide to your lowest paid workers? If a worker's skills and abilities play the largest role in determining their lifelong earnings, have you helped your workforce build new skills and prepare them for the future? Are they competitive in the market when it's time to move up, or even when it's time for them to move on from your company? These are all examples of how, as business leaders, you're perfectly positioned to meaningfully contribute to the economic well-being and mobility of your employees, your communities. You should cherish and celebrate this opportunity. Through your actions, your commitment, your focus, you can play a very direct role in restoring faith in the American dream. Now is the time for visionary corporate leaders like you to reimagine, to rebuild corporate talent practices in a way that emphasizes equity, puts people at the center of business strategy, and creates widespread economic mobility, particularly for those who suffer most from income inequality. This is our moment and our opportunity to reimagine and design a better future on the other side of these crises. And this moment will not last forever. We must take action now if we want to bend this arrow upward. So if you're wondering which talent practices I'm talking about, let me introduce you to JFF's Impact Employer Framework. This framework, shown here in a simplified form, looks at the traditional components of corporate talent strategy, like recruiting, retaining, rewarding, advancing talent. And it expands those to include people-focused benefits, benefits that support inclusive economic mobility while also providing meaningful contribution to the bottom line. You'll see this framework throughout the summit. It'll be a touchstone to help us organize big, bold ideas into a plan of action that works. Now, hopefully this introduction to our summit is resonant for you. Hopefully you can't wait to get started. But if you're still on the fence, you might be wondering, how does all this work? What does it look like for me to lead in this way? What are the trade-offs that I'm going to have to make? And if so, you're in luck, because we're here to talk about how to get started. By simply showing up today, you have taken that first step in your journey of leadership. And across the next 2 days, we'll be sharing practices and ideas that we hope you'll consider putting into play. And along the way, we want to hear all about what you're doing, where your struggles are, and what you're thinking about as you work to improve the lives of your workers.